When Harry's Wife Met H.G., Volume 2, Part 2. Since it has been over a month since the previous instalment, and, in case you have forgotten, the details of the interaction having poured out of your sieve-like mind, I shall, in the tradition of all high-caliber series, provide you with a brief recap. I had met the American actress in a high-end bar and found her of insufficient interest. I rejected Susanna's attempts to have me introduce the American actress to one of my social circles, and instead departed with and enjoyed Sophie, with whom I commented on the American actress's engagement to Harry, and how Harry was now, to use the technical phrase, fucked. Now Harry's wife, she returned to my radar when I was attending a particular function where I was in conversation with a Chelsea-supporting politician, the minister-councillor, and a pastry fiend who supported the Hornets, Watford Football Club. It was at this function that Harry's wife arrived, wrapped in a roll of AstroTurf. Now you're brought up to speed. Listen carefully, and I shall continue. Harry's wife entered the room, and the rictus grin had already been applied. She and Harry were announced to the room, which caused me to roll my eyes, as if we didn't already know who they fucking were. The assembly offered polite applause. "Well done. You've walked through a doorway. Such heroics. Oh, darling, you were wonderful," I thought sarcastically. Already my irritation had formed at this display of appreciation for a half-wit and his vacuous handler. I felt an urge to send an immediate question in her direction, to expose her low cognitive function, to highlight her beige word salad, and under the surface, emptiness. I wanted to ask, "Harry's wife, what is your view on the influence of the noble savage on British and French anti-slavery thought?" And then watch, delighted, as the mouth flapped and sounds were made, but they mean so little and convey even less. You see, I knew one such as her, rather than actually admit, "I'm afraid I'm not well versed in that subject, sorry," would instead attempt to engage with the question, because she doesn't know her own limitations, that she would fail to understand the question and offer a glaring example of her idiocy in action, which would leave those assembled providing an embarrassed silence instead. The wounding would be delicious. Yet I held my tongue, as I watched her eyes glint and flash as she soaked up the offered fuel, relishing the fact that she was the centre of attention. She entered the room as if she was walking down a runway at a fashion show, sashaying into the main room. "Look at me, look at me." Harry walked behind her. He was looking at the guests and nodding in acknowledgement, quite possibly not wanting to witness the blatant display of "I'm here" from his wife. "She has no decorum," muttered the politician next to me out of the side of her mouth. "Can't even spell it," I replied, prompting a short laugh from the politician. She was on board with me. I'd be using that later. Harry's wife was introduced to our host, and then it was Harry's turn. Immediately after the introduction, Harry's wife turned to look around the room. It was like a laser scanning the retinae of a crowd in a science fiction film. She was wanting to suck up every gaze, each glance, all of the attention, namely fuel, which was coming her way. Being taller than many around me, her eyes alighted on me and our gaze met, only briefly, before it flickered onto the next person. However, in that instant of our eyes meeting, she issued a smile towards me, yet it was not a smile of recognition. No, I could tell from her eyes that she had not recognized me from our meeting years ago. This was not a surprise to me. Firstly, the low lighting and the fact that I did actually look different, for reasons I'll explain on another occasion, would cause some issues with regard to recognition for anybody. But secondly, and more pertinently, her superficial nature, as the type of narcissist she is, meant that she would rarely remember people that she had briefly met. In effect, all the objects she meets, all the appliances she engages with, are a blur, and through the process of compartmentalization, the narcissism jettisons the details and identity of those the narcissist deals with, only recalling it where it serves a purpose. Was I offended by this failure to recognize me? Not at all. Again, for two reasons. One, given what I do, I aim often not to be recognized or even remembered. I have other outlets to secure being memorable, and thus this failure to recognize only goes to actually prove my effectiveness. In effect, it's a compliment. And secondly, she is not somebody that matters to me to the extent that I would want her to remember. Accordingly, she did not amount to a threat to control, and furthermore, what she actually did do showed that she was under control. In that instant, her smile was not of recognition, but of flirtation. Yes, she curled her mouth in a suggestive manner, looked down, and then back at me, as if to say, "You want to fuck me, don't you?" Before she then moved on. I was not surprised by this smile. It is one I have received many times, and it just underpinned her lack of decorum as earlier identified. Our host then engaged in taking the Prince of Pink Pancakes and his handler around the room to meet various knee-bending and elbow people. This allowed our small group to return to our conversation, as many others did, the volume rising once again. As I conversed, I could see out of the corner of my eye Harry's wife as she was ushered from group to group. In every instance, she was ahead of her husband. She positioned herself central to each group she met, our host behind to the left, her husband behind to the right. He was not seen as her equal. Nobody was, as she shook hands and nodded. Occasionally, one would hear her strident laugh, which was unnatural in the way it burst, too loud, too forced. Clearly, the cherry picker was having a hard time finding the correct packages. Harry's wife eventually ended up being introduced to the adjoining group, and I noticed Harry then moving away from that group with a morose look on his face, leaving his wife alone as he followed a man. Harry's wife did not even notice that he had departed as she began to shake hands with the new group. I was able to maintain the thrust of my group's conversation. Fatty Hornet was regaling us with his views about Brexit. It would not be difficult to plug back into that conversation, as he rattled off various trite observations. I knew exactly what he was about, thus picking up the thread would prove simple. I was thus able to eavesdrop on the nearby conversation. "Duchess, may I introduce Nobby Conkerbollocks, Chief Executive of Wankle Rotary Engines," our host would commence. "Pleased to meet you," came the response with the corresponding handshake. "Duchess, may I introduce Ophelia Bollocks, patron of doing good everywhere." "Pleased to meet you." And on it went until everybody in the corresponding group had been introduced. Once introductions had been effected, she then came with her opener. "Are you all excited to hear what I've come to tell you?" she asked. She couldn't be bothered to mutter the traditional, "And have you come far?" or "And what do you do?" or even, "Ah, yes, I've heard of that. Tell me more about your work." Oh no, instead it was all about her. Too polite to respond with, "I'd rather shove a skewer in my left eyeball than hear your torrent of nothingness." The small group gave an asserting murmur of consent and approval. "Oh, good," she remarked in response. What a charisma overload. The group were clearly under control and fueling her, and that was all that mattered. Her narcissism need not, although it was of course incapable of doing so, even if it needed to, increasing the magnetism. "Did you enjoy your time in Canada?" asked one of the group. A safe question indeed. "Oh, it was wonderful. Toronto is an amazing city, much like London," she drawled. "No, it's not," I wanted to interject. "The people there were so kind to me, so welcoming to me while I was filming. Have you watched Suits?" she asked. Noises of negativity flowed, and I laughed, causing Fatty Hornet to give me a quizzical look. "Something on the other side of the room," I explained to the pastry fiend. He nodded and continued with his waffle as I returned to listen in on the scintillating revelations of Harry's wife. "Oh, has he gone?" I heard her remark, but it was simply a dismissive observation. Evidently, she was referring to Harry as our host turned and made to penetrate our group. Her interaction with the preceding group was short. It had to be, in order to facilitate all of the introductions around the room. And now it was our turn.